Welcome. I'm Jacob Owens, managing editor of the Cecil Whig newspaper. I'm here today with incumbent Councilman Dan Schneckenburger from District 3. Welcome, Dan. Get a chance to sit down and talk a little bit about the 2018 campaign with us.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure to be here.
I just want to say, first and foremost, to anybody watching out there, that we did extend invitations to both Al Miller as well as Thomas Wilson, your opponents in the Republican primary, to come and answer some questions with us today. They both either declined or did not respond to that invitation. Wondering just any reaction in terms of their decision not to be here today.
I've tried to be as accessible as I can throughout my my 4-year term, and honestly, when I was elected, Cecil TV was not even part of it, but they've been a regular fixture at our county council meetings, and just felt it was a good opportunity when Doug tried repeatedly to put this District 3 panel together, and I said, hey, I'm available at any time you want, and so I'm glad to be here. We've done several forums, lots of opportunities, and I think that's, as a candidate, you have to be accessible so voters can see what your position is on the issues.
Sure. Now, Dan, you're serving currently as Vice President of the Council, the second senior position on the Council. You're finishing up a first term here with the county's legislative body. You've now been through 2 budget cycles underneath County Executive Alan McCarthy. First one marked by a pretty controversial debate over some tax increases. The second one not so much, although there were some questions over some spending allocations.
Sure.
Just wondering, if from a general impression, where do you feel that the council and the county really stand after 2 cycles here with County Executive McCarthy?
Well, I think certainly the second budget was certainly a lot one that people could agree with. We went through a very excessive tax increase. It was a surprise to all of us, and one of the things we indicated to the county executive was we don't want to be surprised anymore. That was a surprise budget, and said let's try to work together and be a little bit more. Whatever revenues were coming in, that's what we're going to spend. We don't need any more revenue increasing budgets, or it's going to fail. It would fail again, or we have to look at some other measures. I think the other part is county council hired for the first time our own auditor, and I don't know that kept the county executive's budget people honest or not, but I think we're going to continue to do that in the future to look for ways to allow county council to have a very good say in the budget process.
Right, and for viewers out there that are unaware, the council, of course, doesn't have an opportunity to add spending to the budget, although there are some limited means in the education budget. But for the most part, your goal is to either cut spending and fulfill some revenue obligations. But I'm wondering, the first budget you guys were a part of obviously ended in some controversy because you guys were unable to agree on a proposal amongst yourselves, the 5-member body. That there were a number of cut discussions that came up last year for that. I'm wondering, just general reaction, how do you feel about how that cycle ended ultimately with Executive McCarthy's proposal becoming law without action from the council?
I think a lot of people were surprised that measure we amended our charter. I believe the first year that County Executive Moore was in to relay that back. A lot of people thought if you rejected a budget, it went back to the previous fiscal year, which is almost impossible to do once you've indicated the kind of spending cycles you want to do. Honestly, I still run on a platform of being a fiscal conservative. I did not want to raise taxes. We at least 2 council members tried very hard to put some significant cuts into that budget, and we still need 3 people to agree. We did not. I was actually surprised that Councilman Patchell voted against the budget since he didn't suggest any cuts in the entire budget cycle. I thought the budget would pass and we would have roughly $500,000 of cuts, and I still would have voted against it, but that was a surprise vote, and so the rest is history.
Yeah. This cycle, of course, we didn't get any proposed tax increases from Executive McCarthy's budget, although there were some spending allocations that certainly people had some questions about, whether it was the Northeast Library or some of the park acquisitions and upgrades.
Right.
and certainly yourself has been vocal about some of the fire company allocations as well. Just wondering, did you, in the end, you did not propose any spending cuts to the executive's proposal. I'm wondering if there was a reason for that, or if you just felt that his proposal was sufficient.
I felt the budget was very much better this year. I think the spending priorities were where they needed to be. Obviously, the Board of Education wanted some more funding, but we didn't have the revenue to do that. The other two, when you talk about library or parks, they were both in our capital improvement program, so it really didn't affect our budget as much, you know, the operating budget or the small cap budget. So those were ones we were going to get bonds anyway to invest on. The turf field in Bohemia was a little surprising, but I think the administration wanted to move it up 1 year. They were talking about every 2 years about doing that. And then obviously the other one to have such a sizable cut in the fire company's equipment budget. The budget had to be balanced. I understand that part, but when at least 5 or 6 days after the budget had been released and there was no word from the administration that they were going to try to make this up, that's when, and listening to the fire companies, I felt I was obligated to, you know, take their position and say we need to fully fund this. We know we have close to a $1.8 million surplus in fiscal year 18, so I really felt that we will have some additional revenues that we can either look to restore that funding completely, it's about $580,000, and still have at least $1 million left over for a potential tax cut or what have you, and we're already looking at a surplus in fiscal year 19. So 17, 18, 19, I mean, most people would realize that maybe our taxes are too high if we're going to run surplus budgets.
Sure. Executive McCarthy's obviously made it a priority in his budget proposals to balance without the use of savings, and that's, you know, somewhat of a novel idea in the county's recent history, and it's led to probably some hand-wringing over some particular allocations. Just in general terms, thoughts on whether the county should perhaps spend a little bit more of its savings on some of these one-time projects, or if what he is doing in the long run is the right decision.
I think in the long run it's a sound strategy. I think it was, again, a difference from what he potentially had believed on campaigning for that office. I never heard that piece come, you know, from his lips. I understand the fiscal piece of it. Everybody has an idea where that percentage of unassigned fund balance should be, and we probably could build it up, and maybe we'll do so as we continue to see the tax revenues from some of the new businesses that the county has created here in the last year and a half. That's really going to bolster our reserves and revenues, and there'll be a chance to put some of that money aside. With that, although it is curious that the administration came with a budget amendment for $130,000 to fund 2 parks employees back in January to help facilitate not only getting Calvert ready for the spring, but also the new park that's at the former Brantwood Golf Course. So they actually then went against their own policy by saying, here, we're going to take savings to create growth in the government, and I felt that was the wrong approach. It was inconsistent, and I voted against that.
Sure. Kind of dovetailing off a little bit of what you were just talking about there, I'm interested in terms of the county's economic development policy and future. Obviously, we've had a number of large gains here in just in the last few years, whether it's Lidl or Amazon, True Air, Fortress Steel, a number of others. In terms of where we are in terms of economic growth and pursuing some of these distribution-related industries, do you feel that that's the right sector to be pursuing, or is diversification of services something we should put an emphasis on?
I think diversification is always the goal. I mean, we have a very large park, Principio Industrial Park. It was almost 800 and some acres of improved land that was zoned for distribution, and that's because of the tremendous growth you have from the Port of Baltimore. We're seeing that growth. There, people want to say, hey, I need the land, and Cecil County's got it. We're going to see more growth with Medline coming on stream maybe by the end of the year.
Right.
The property tax base from just these companies is roughly close to $30 million after the enterprise zone tax credits expire over the next 10 years. But every year we're going to get a bigger check from these investments. And that, to me, is the proper way to balance your budget. Look at that tax base as opposed to looking at the people that pay the property taxes from that standpoint. But what people, Jake, fail to realize is W.O. Gore hired this year. Terumo's looking to hire 900 people over the next 5 years. And they've already hired at least 100 last year. Orbital ATK, Northrop Grumman. There's a big push to have some expansion there with some very high-tech engineering-related jobs. So I think the county is looking at all avenues, but those are things that are going to come on and are going to balance this wave of distribution activities that we have. And we've also been told by these tenants that our workforce is still available. We haven't tapped it out, meaning there's not enough workers to fill with Medline or 2 other tenants that are going to potentially be announced later this year or what have you. So I think Cecil County at this point has to continue to get these because they are good revenue makers for the county, and we really haven't seen any of the revenue from all the hires. This is just basic permit fees, transfer taxes, and what have you, and it's helped us out, and I think every year we're going to continue to see the fruits of those labors.
Income tax and everything else piggybacking off that in future years.
Yes.
So you mentioned there that some of the economic development growth that is happening in the county isn't necessarily grabbing headlines, whether it's Gore hiring or Terumo hiring.
No,
so there might be a diversification that isn't as noticeable already.
Well, these are really high-tech manufacturers. The manufacturing sector in Cecil County is one of the top sectors in the state. Department of Commerce and Secretary Gill understands that as well. So these companies continue to invest here, and W.O. Gore's got 14 sites, and they continue to innovate and look for ways to expand their product line, and they're going to do it right here in Cecil County. We're thrilled about Terumo saying, hey, we're going to invest here in Elkton and continue to expand. And Northrop Grumman, I think, is going to be a very good addition. It's going to actually give us a big-time defense contractor. They did not have a rocket propulsion division. They compete with Lockheed Martin all the time. Lockheed Martin does. Right. Orbital ATK was going against Lockheed Martin and a lot of defense contractors. Now Northrop Grumman can go after them with all the phases, and I just think that bodes well for a educated, STEM-related type workforce that right now our schools do very well in producing some of these kids. We just have to, once they get their college degree, we can come back and say, hey, you have a job here. Come back to Cecil County and work and live and play.
Sure.